Hi everyone, this is Cheryl and welcome to my sewing room. I'm going to demonstrate how to make this easy baby quilt. If you're new to quilting, you've never made one before, this is the perfect project so you can learn how to do basic quilting techniques. So let's get started. Here is the amount of fabric you will need. I'm demonstrating the finished size one that is 31 inches by 31 inches. This is a perfect size for a newborn baby. If you want to make one for an older baby, then select the size 40 inch by 40 inch. So for the first one here, out of A, you'll need a half a yard, your fabric B, 1/4 yard, and fabric C, 1/4 yard. For the fabric on the back of the quilt, you'll need 1 yard, polyester batting 1 yard, cut 20 squares, which are 8.5 inches square, and you're going to have 4 rows with 4 squares in a row. The finished size one, which is 40 inch by 40 inch, out of fabric A, you'll need 3/4 yard, fabric B and C, you'll need 1/2 yard of each, and for the fabric on the back, you'll need 1¼ yards. The polyester batting, you'll need 1¼ yard, and you'll have 5 rows with 5 in a row. So out of that one, you're going to cut 25 8.5 inch squares. Your polyester batting, I am using the Extra Loft polyester batting, which is a little thicker and a little fluffier, and you can get them in small packages. This is the layout for each of the fabric squares. Now you can lay them out in any order that you like, but this is what I recommend. For the smaller one, as you see, there's 4 in a row, and the fabric A has 2 of them in each row. The larger size, there's 5 rows with 5 in a row, and you'll see that the fabric A, in several of the rows, it's 3 squares, and then several other rows, it's only 2 squares. This is my fabric A, and I need to cut out of this 8 squares that are 8.5 inches squared. So I'm going to demonstrate how to start out by cutting strips and then cutting those strips into squares. So leave your fabric that you purchased folded in half as it is when you purchase it off of the bolt. Then make sure your raw edges down here, which are probably not going to be even when you purchase them, you need to trim them straight. Place your rotary cutter ruler on that edge. If you don't have a rotary cutter and ruler, then you need to be very careful on how to cut out your squares. Then cut this edge straight, and this first line on the cutting mat is the 0 line, so that's where it is right now. Move the ruler over 8.5 inches, line your ruler up down here as well as up here so you know that everything is straight, and always double check and cut your first strip. Move your ruler over 8.5 inches again, which would be your 17-inch line on your cutting mat, and again always double check. Stack the 2 strips on top of each other, and here are the selvage edges. Pull those selvage edges past this first line here, and you're going to trim this off. And line your ruler up again so that it's nice and straight on your cutting mat. Then move your ruler over 8.5 inches and do your first cut. Now you have 4 squares cut out. Move it over 8.5 inches again, which will put you on the 17-inch mark here, and do your last cut. You now have your 8 squares of fabric A. This is my fabric B and fabric C, When you go to cut these squares out, all you need to do is cut one strip out of each fabric that is 8.5 inches wide, and from each one of those strips you will be able to get your 4 squares that you need out of fabric B and C. Lay out all of your blocks. You're going to have 4 rows with 4 squares in each row. Of the fabric A, I put 2 squares of it in each row. Then randomly distribute fabric B and C within those rows. Starting with row 1 up here, you're going to begin stitching the squares together. So bring front sides together and stitch 1/4 inch seam along this edge. Then unfold and continue down the row. Place this one on top and stitch a 1/4 inch seam. Unfold, stitch this one on top, 1/4 inch seam, and then go to row 2, row 3, and row 4. When making a quilt, it's always very important to press your seams so that everything will match up. So the first thing you want to do is press your seams on the back side. And you just keep going along your row, pressing those seams on the back side. Then you're going to press on top. And it works really well if you keep the blocks rows lifted a little bit so that you push your seams all in one direction. So then just gently push against that seam, forcing it to go in one direction. And then you just keep going on down the row until you get everything pressed. And then after you're done, turn it over to the back and make sure all of your seams are going in one direction. When you're pressing each of the rows, you want to make sure that each row is going in the opposite direction of the previous row. The reason why you press the seams going in different directions for each row is so that when you stitch the rows together, the seams match up much easier. So the seams in this row are going in this direction, in this direction, this direction, and the last row you can't see is going back in this direction. So now you're going to take rows 1 and 2 and bring them on top of each other. And you're going to match the seams. So you want to bring them really close together. And if it feels nice and flat in there, that means that it's matched up. So put a pin there. And if you're not quite sure, just look to see if the seam on the bottom is going in the opposite direction than the one on top. So go ahead and match up all your seams first. That's the first thing you should do. Then finish pinning across. And then again do a 1/4 inch seam all the way across. And after you finish these 2 rows, then unfold them and continue adding on the other 2 rows. After you've stitched your rows together, then you want to press your seams. First, press the seams on the back side. So you want to bring front sides together of the first 2 rows and press along this back side edge. Then you're going to press on top, so unfold, and as you're pressing, you want the seams to go all in one direction all the way across. So push against that seam and press. Take the ruffle and place it front side down on the front side of your quilt top. If there is an obvious front or back to your ruffle, make sure it's the front side down. Then you're going to go in about 4 inches and begin stitching. And you're going to stitch real close to the edge, 1/8 of an inch all the way around all 4 sides. When you're doing the corners, just do a very tiny little fold down here and stitch around those corners. And it's helpful when you come to a corner to leave your needle down and lift up the presser foot, turn your fabric, put the presser foot back down and continue stitching. That way you won't lose your place. Now when you're coming close to where you started, here's my starting point, I started stitching here, then I'm going to stop far enough away so that I have plenty of room to turn these ends and bring them together. So now take your two ends, overlap them, and leave about 1/4 inch overlap and trim the excess off. Now open up the two ends like this. Open that one up that way and this one that way. Okay? Now bring the two ends together. Bring those sides together and stitch a narrow little 1/8 inch right along this end right here. So here's my seam. Now take the ruffle and bring the seam face down. Then fold the seam. Bring those two sides together and the little seam line should be in the middle there. And now you're going to stitch 1/4 inch seam right along here. Now this seam that you just did is called a French seam. And it is done when the seam is going to be exposed, but you don't want the raw edges to show. And it also helps to prevent the raw edges from unraveling when you're washing. So after you've done your seam, then put the ruffle back down and finish stitching it up right along here. Place your polyester batting down first. Then take the fabric for the back and place it on top and smooth your fabric out. Make sure that you have the pretty side of your fabric for the back facing up. Then take your quilt top and have the pretty side facing down. So you're now looking at the back side. Smooth out your quilt top piece. Then take pins and pin the edges down and make sure you tuck the ruffle in underneath. So you want to pin it all around all 4 sides before you start trimming because you don't want the fabric to shift. Then place your ruler on the edge of your fabric and begin to trim all of the edges off. Place all of your pins around the edge with the pointed end going in towards the center of the quilt. And you want to have plenty of pins because you don't want the fabric shifting apart. So you're going to do that around all of the edges. Then you're going to leave an opening, anywhere between 10 and 12 inches because you want to leave it open big enough so that you're able to turn it front side out. So make sure you leave that opening. Then starting over here, you're going to begin stitching back and forth a few times in place and stitch all the way down to the corner. When you get down to the corner, leave your needle down, lift up your presser foot, turn your quilt, lower the presser foot, and continue stitching. And again, you're doing a 1/4 inch seam all the way around all 4 sides. And when you come back around to your last side, you get here where you at the other side of your opening and stitch back and forth a few times. After you've stitched around all 4 sides, you're going to trim a little bit of the fabric off at each corner. Be careful you don't cut into your stitches. The reason why you cut this off is so that the corners will lay a little smoother. So cut a little bit of that point off, and I sometimes will go off on the side and trim just a little bit off there too. So do that at all 4 corners, then reach inside your opening and turn the blanket front side out. Fold your opening edges in and then pin it closed. And I like to go around all four sides and pin my edges, because after you have pinned your edges, you want to stitch not only this opening down, but you want to stitch all of the sides down and stitch real close to the edge of the fabric on the back. And make sure when you're going around all your sides, you're pulling out on the ruffle just a little bit. Not so much at the opening, but on the other sides. There's one last step before you're done, and this is called your quilting stitches or top stitches. Very simple to do. You're going to do something called stitch in the ditch. The ditch is where two pieces of fabric come together, and then this is the ditch. And you're going to stitch on all of your seams. You're going to go take the first one and stitch straight down. One thing that you need to do so that your fabric does not shift is to either use safety pins or straight pins, because it will shift if you don't do that. Also, if you have a walking foot on your machine, it would help to use that, because this helps to prevent your fabric from shifting as you are stitching. You can get these on the internet. There's a variety of sewing machine supply websites that you can get the walking feet. You can also find it on Amazon.com probably. Just enter the name of your sewing machine and the model of your sewing machine, and a variety of options will appear. I've seen them for around $25. Some people have found them for less. If you have a really high-end machine, of course it could cost you around $150, depending on the model of your machine. So take one row at a time, stitch all the way down one row, then shift it over, do the next row, and keep shifting. Then turn your quilt and begin going in the other direction. Do this row, move over, second row, and then third row, and then you're done. Here's the back side of the quilt, and you can see that the stitch in the ditch looks like nice straight lines on the back of your quilt. And here's the quilt from the front side. If you are interested in other quilting projects, then go to the end of this video to a green screen and click on the links. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click on thumbs up, and don't forget to click on share to share this video with your friends. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click on that red subscribe button down there in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Enter your email address, click on that little bell so you receive email notifications about my latest video. I'm Cheryl, and I'm so glad you came to my sewing room. See you next time, and happy sewing!